He is Neeraj Berry. Welcome on stage. Come on, sound alive.
Thank you.
Hey. Stage is yours. Enjoy yourself.
Awesome. Hello, Moribor. Thank you for having me. I am going to talk about probably the best problem you can have at a startup, which is how to navigate periods of accelerated growth. Quickly about my background. I am from the United States. I started my career in finance. I worked in Wall Street doing investment banking for a few years, then moved back to Silicon Valley and started 2 technology businesses, 12 Society and most recently Sprig. Today I'm going to talk primarily about my journey building Sprig, which was a vertically integrated food delivery company. And so what that means is we would cook and deliver food in 20 minutes, and we basically provided the easiest way for people to eat healthy food. On the back end, that means that we cooked large amounts of food at tremendous scale. We built mobile apps for our customers as well as our drivers and our kitchen staff. And yes, we did the delivery all in-house. And so we were kind of a large logistics company as well. When we started Sprig in the beginning of 2013, we just had an idea, and I had one other co-founder. And fast forward 3 years later, and we were a business that was pretty large in scale. We were about 1,200 employees. We had raised $57 million in venture capital from some of the best investors in Silicon Valley, including Greylock Partners, Social Capital, Battery Ventures, and Excel, and a host of other amazing folks. And we had delivered about 1 million meals. And so I'm going to talk about my experience from that idea stage all the way through kind of the end of our Series B, which was effectively that first 3-year period. So I think most people, let's get this clicker to work. Most people, when they think about entrepreneurship outside of Silicon Valley, they think this is the life of an entrepreneur. And is that right? Of course it's not. Entrepreneurship looks nothing like that. And in fact, my entrepreneurial journey started out looking more like this, both metaphorically and literally. What I was noticing was that it was incredibly difficult for me to figure out how to maintain a healthy lifestyle and a healthy diet, especially as I was an entrepreneur working long hours. I was constantly having to choose either spending a lot of time in cooking myself, and time was really at a premium, or I would have to sacrifice that and effectively sacrifice on health. And it was kind of constantly this tension. And when I noticed this about my life, I started to ask my friends and family and peer group, and basically everybody had the same problem set, which led me to the first key lesson that I learned about entrepreneurship, which is that one, you solve a business to solve a problem. And if there's anything you take away from this talk, I think this is probably the most important lesson that I've learned. Both for what it says, but also what it doesn't say. So we'll start with what it doesn't say. You don't start a business because, you don't start a startup because you want to get rich or you want to get famous or you want to live a lifestyle or any other reason, because there's plenty of easier ways to do that. Instead, if you want to build a business that can grow really quickly and can grow to a massive scale, you fundamentally have to be dedicated to solving a core problem. And that shifts the focus away from you as the entrepreneur and onto your customers. And so you need to be really customer-driven and product-driven to ensure that you are solving that problem relentlessly, better and better, day after day after day. And it's a really important lesson because it means that you need to actually understand your customer and understand their problem better than they understand it themselves. And so, what I had done is I noticed that I had a personal problem, and I started to do really deep customer development and found that other folks shared the similar problem. And through that kind of deep customer development and industry research, I started to develop an idea of how I thought the world would develop. And that leads me to the second really important lesson for anybody who has an aspiration of building a large, iconic business that touches a lot of people, is you fundamentally need to be motivated and you need to have a vision about, one, how the world will progress, but also how technology will allow you to take that core problem set that you're trying to solve and reconfigure the problem, and why today technology, or why in the future technology will allow you to solve it in a better way. And at Sprig, and these are actually literally slides from our pre-Series A deck, this was the thesis by which we were able to develop the problem. So first, we realized that outsourcing food is an increasingly enormous industry. And in fact, in the United States, as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, outsourcing food finally became a bigger market. So restaurant sales finally became a bigger market than grocery sales. And so what that was an indication to us was that people were spending less time cooking and more time buying food that was already prepared. Two, we saw that the world was moving more in a direction that people started to care about what they were eating. Not just about the actual nutritional information, but also in terms of sourcing standards and just having transparency into what you're putting into your body. And what we saw is that especially in restaurants, you have no idea where the food is coming from. And that seems to be a really fundamental mismatch between what customers care about and what they're getting. And then lastly, people, the world's moving more towards mobile and more towards on-demand. And we took this three-prong thesis and developed Sprig, which was, in our eyes, the easiest way to eat well. The reason that it's really important to have a vision is because it allows you, one, to think long-term. And as you're building businesses, it's important not to think about, how do I make a quick buck over the next 2 years? It's important to think about, how is the industry going to develop over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and how I'm going to build a solution that is able to stand that test of time. And it also allows you the flexibility of not being tied to the specific strategy that you come up with at the very beginning. And if you look at, if you really study large iconic businesses that have grown quickly, like Amazon or Airbnb and Uber, all of them had a fundamental customer problem that they were trying to solve, but dramatically shifted the way that they were solving it along the way based on what they were learning. I think Amazon's a really interesting example because from the very beginning, they were trying to build a business that was the everything store or bringing all of commerce to the web. But because they had this long-term vision, they were able to go step by step and start by just selling books. So now that you have, are tackling a large problem, and that you've established a perspective or a vision on how the world is going to develop and an idea of what that solution is going to look like, at every point of entrepreneurship, it's, the core lesson is that you need to learn quickly and take calculated risks. And I think what I've seen is that entrepreneurs are actually too slow in their learning early and do not de-risk enough later on. And, the way that you do this is you test your hypotheses, and you de-risk. And so at Sprig, we were, as I mentioned, we were two folks who, neither of us actually had food background, and neither of us had any kind of technical expertise, and yet we were trying to build a food technology company. And early on, what we decided is that we wanted to de-risk and test the hypothesis and test the ones that were the riskiest, so that we understood we could learn the most and learn the fastest. And if you subscribe to the lean startup methodology, I think that's probably fairly familiar to you. And so what we wanted to test is whether, one, customers would, whether they would like a service that delivered healthy food affordably and quickly, and two, whether we could do it. But how do two guys with no domain expertise and no funding figure that out? Well, we broke down the problem into what we thought of as the 4 key steps that we needed to run a test. And that was, 1, we needed food. 2, we needed customers. 3, we needed a way to order food. And 4, we needed a way to deliver food. And so first we needed food. I went out and put classified ads on Craigslist saying, hey, I need a chef to cook 40 meals next week. So food, check. We needed customers. We emailed our network in San Francisco and said, next Wednesday, if you don't have dinner plans, order food from us. We're going to be delivering food. Customers, check. 3, we needed a way to take in orders. And so we built this simple a page on Eventbrite which is generally a service used to sell tickets. And instead of selling tickets, we listed the chef's special pork meatballs or the chicken dish. And when it came time for dinner, we emailed the Eventbrite page to all of our friends, and we started ingesting orders that way. And then lastly, we printed out a map of San Francisco and used small, like, Settlers of Catan pieces, which is a board game. And we, as orders were coming in, we would put them on a map, and my co-founder would text me and say, hey, an order came in at this intersection, you should go deliver it there. And that was, our first kind of, that was our first software system that was our delivery algorithm. And so we did all of this in 10 days. And what we were able to do is from going from a very initial concept to now running a full-fledged test where we were testing a lot of really important hypotheses, by breaking the problem down and figuring out how to hack it quickly, we were able to get a tremendous amount of learning that I think it would take a lot of folks months and tremendous amount of capital to kind of do the same thing. I think it's often your intuition to build and to get the everything perfect before you do it. But this idea of how do you figure out how to break down tests and test quickly is really important even as you scale. Lesson number 3, it's not your job to be right. And I think this is a very difficult one, especially when you are growing, because that means that things are working. And I'll give you another example. So this is our revenue graph in our first year of our business, and we grew 16x and that was from making thousands of dollars a week to hundreds of thousands of dollars a week. Where you see the star was a really critical point for us. We had already basically 10x the business week over week from the time we launched, and so we had a lot of reasons to feel good about ourselves. But as we kind of continued to monitor what our customers were saying, but also what our competitors were doing. And we found a competitor that had metrics that didn't look as good as this, and their customers' feedback was not as positive as ours. But what we noticed is that they were doing something in their operational model that allowed them to scale in a better way than we were setting ourselves up to do. And rather than resting on our laurels and being really committed to the very specific tactical way that we were operating our business, where that star appears, we basically revamped and rebuilt our entire operating model. And I think that was a really important step because it allowed us to continue to scale, and we would have hit really tremendous scaling challenges much quicker. And so it's not your job to be right. Don't fall in love with your idea or your specific tactic. Your job as a founder or an entrepreneur is to find the right answer. And that can come from you, it can come from your team, it can come from your competitors, it can come from anybody. It's important to be relentlessly dedicated to solving your customer's problem better and better and better, no matter where that kind of concept comes from. Okay, so this is another lesson that becomes really hard as you are scaling, but is really tremendously important. Which is generally when businesses scale, there becomes a rush to bring in talent. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of simply bringing in people and throwing bodies at problem. In many ways, I've learned this the hard way as well, is that when you are growing, that's when it is most important to actually double down on culture and to make culture the top priority when you are bringing people into the organization, and actually also a top priority as you are managing them through the organization and potentially out. And when I say culture fit, I don't mean people who get along necessarily with everybody on the team. I think it's really important to take a deep introspective look at both the set of skills and characteristics that you already embody and the set of characteristics that you think are most important for your business to be successful in whatever industry it is. Find that intersection and then double down on that set. And I've seen people make kind of two different types of mistakes when it comes to culture. The first is that it can become very difficult to bring in people, or when people have very specific or talented skills, it can be very difficult. It can be very easy, basically, to overlook problems with culture when they are performing. But that is simply organizational debt that you are taking on. And in organizational debt works the same way as financial debt or technical debt. It's easy to ignore in the beginning, but the more you ignore it, the more likely it is that you're going to have to burn everything to the ground to fix it. And it can potentially become fatal to your organization. And then the second is, I've seen people who are very popular within an organization, but don't embody those skills or don't embody those characteristics that are necessary for the organization to be successful. I've seen entrepreneurs who are kind of overlooked that as well. And I think it's really important to make sure that you are not, you're being very critical and honest and transparent with yourself about the type of culture that you have and the type of culture that you want to have. The next lesson is distraction is the enemy of success. And I think this is important because when you are growing quickly, if you are having success, the types of distractions that pop up will change, and some of them won't even appear to be distractions. Distractions can take a lot of forms. And what I fundamentally mean is distraction from solving your customer's problem better and better. Distraction can come in the form of PR. It can come in the form of internal politics. And all these things start to intensify as your organization scales and as it gets bigger. It can come in the form of being overly focused and overly critical on what your competitors are doing. And lastly, it can come in the form of growth. And I've seen for many teams, when they start to have a bit of success, growth can kind of feel like a bit of a drug, and being overly optimized and concerned and obsessed with growth as opposed to solving your customer's core problem can distract you from the thing that separates you from the rest of the organization. And that itself is really dangerous, because if you're not completely focused on solving your customer's problem better than everybody else's and better than everybody else will, what I think can be the most fatal lesson and the hardest lesson to learn is that product market fit is not something you achieve, it's something that you are experiencing. And what I mean by this is that product market fit, oftentimes founders think of it as a stage. It's like, okay, I've got product market fit, now I'm going to raise additional capital, now I don't have to worry about it, we're just going to go off to the races. But product market fit itself has two core variables in it. There's the product, and then there's the market. And if either of these changes over time, you're at risk of losing product market fit. And I think there's two easy ways there's two clear ways that you're at risk of this. The first is if you're focused on growth, and if you're focused on just increasing the top line, I've seen that actually inhibit the way that entrepreneurs and companies, it can hurt your product value. It can hurt your value proposition to your customers. And you can start to do things like shortcuts or focusing or discounts or figuring out ways to scale the business, and effectively just being distracted by that. So and also focusing on things like profitability can hurt. Like as you scale, there's going to be a variety of new and important characteristics that you need to focus on, but that can ultimately distract you from your value proposition. And the second is the market. As folks start to continue to think more about growth, and they start doubling down on what they are already doing, you're basically opening yourself up to risk that a competitor or that someone is going to think of a new innovative way of solving your customer's problem. And if the market shifts, if the available solution set for a customer's problem shifts, then the market itself has changed. And so I would kind of constantly think about the industry or the incumbents that, as you're building your businesses, the incumbents that you're disrupting. They're all people, they're all folks, they're all businesses that have taken their eyes off the prize and have kind of started to rest on their laurels. And I think it's important to make sure that you're focused in a way that doesn't open you up to the same thing. And so there are a lot of lessons there's a lot of things that you need to know to survive periods and to really succeed in periods of hypergrowth. But I think fundamentally it's best to just come back to the fundamentals and make sure that you are solving make sure you are customer-driven and product-driven, that you have a clear vision for what you're building towards, that you are constantly testing and iterating and learning, that you're removing your ego and removing your dedication to the specific tactics and strategies that you're using. You're doubling down on culture, you're removing distraction, and you are focused on maintaining and deepening product market fit. So thank you guys.